Friday, the 24th of December, 1971. Juliane Koepcke, a 17-year-old teenager, was traveling with her mother from Lima to Iquitos to celebrate Christmas with her father. The flight which they were about to board was the Lanza Flight 508. Even though the airline had a terrible reputation, it was a last-minute resort as all the remaining flights were booked for the day. After boarding all the 86 passengers, the Lanza flight, which was being operated by a 6-member crew, began its departure from Lima's Jorge Chavez International Airport just before noon on Christmas Eve, bound for Pucallpa, a scheduled stop en route to Iquitos. Juliane was sitting in 19F by the window, close to the airplane's wings, while her mother was beside her in seat 19E, the middle seat. Everyone on board were expecting to have a smooth flight. After cruising for about 30 minutes, the airplane was surrounded by dark clouds as it was passing through a thunderstorm. Suddenly, Juliane notices a bright flash out of her window. The lightning had struck the fuel tank on the right wing, followed by a deafening explosion that blew a hole in the airplane. She felt a rush of wind enter the cabin of the airplane, and everything was sucked out of the fuselage. Amidst all the chaos, Juliane hears her mother's voice as she yells, "That is the end. It's all over." The airplane plunged towards the ground and started breaking into pieces. In an instant, Juliane, while being strapped to her seat, was ejected from the fuselage and started plummeting towards the earth at terrifying speed. As she spiraled face down, the seatbelt constricted her stomach, making it impossible for her to breathe. The horrifying realization of her situation dawned upon her, but before she could fully process it or react, she lost consciousness. Luckily, she survived the crash due to her fastened seatbelt, which cushioned the impact. When she regained consciousness the next day, she was drenched from the pouring rain, after what felt like minutes had been hours. She glanced at her wristwatch, which miraculously still worked, indicating the time as 9 a.m. She realized she had been unconscious for nearly a day since the crash. With great difficulty, she extricated herself from beneath her airplane seat and lay flat on her back. Every inch of her body throbbed in pain from the impact. She was feeling a sharp sting of a broken collarbone and had a deep gash on her right arm. Her vision was blurry from her swollen right eye and a pounding headache due to severe concussion. Juliane was in her short, sleeveless mini dress and had only one white sandal. Aside from the swelling, she was nearsighted and had lost her glasses, making it difficult to see clearly. Taking a grip of her body, Juliane began to crawl and start searching the area around the crash site. She began marking trees to keep her bearings and called for her mother.
Where are you?
Hearing nothing except the sounds of the rainforest, she began to feel helpless and scared. After a while, Juliane forced herself to stand. At first, she was wobbly, but gradually grew steady on her feet. Being thirsty, she drank raindrops off of leaves, knowing they won't be poisonous. She was hearing planes overhead, which were probably looking for the wreckage, but couldn't see them due to the dense tree canopy of the forest. Realizing she needed to get somewhere wide open to be visible to the rescue teams, she began to navigate her way through the dense jungle. As she was walking, she tested the area in front of her by throwing her remaining shoe ahead, moving forward to pick it up, and tossing it again. She did so to avoid stepping on any snakes or any other creature which could be camouflaged on dry leaves. In her journey towards finding an open expanse, Juliane came across a small stream of water, which became a glimmer of hope and despair. She remembered her father's advice: follow the water downstream. It will eventually join a larger stream and ultimately lead to a river or lake, where you're likely to find civilization. Unlike most children, Juliane's upbringing had been shaped oddly by the unique professions of her parents. Her father, a distinguished zoologist, and her mother, a renowned ornithologist, had worked at Panguana Research Station in the Peruvian rainforest. Juliane was raised in a familiar environment, and her upbringing was far from ordinary. The lessons from her parents went beyond academic knowledge. They equipped her with practical survival skills. Raised amidst the flora and fauna, she had developed an acute awareness of her surroundings, always prepared for the unpredictable nature of the wild. As she began walking beside the stream, her journey was about to encounter the frightening challenges posed by the unforgiving Amazon rainforest. It was the start of monsoon season, which meant there were no fruits or berries to be eaten. She also faced the reality of her situation, as she was lacking the tools needed to cut down trees, catch fishes from the stream, or cook roots for sustenance. Survival became a constant battle, as Juliane knew that the jungle held hidden dangers, with many plants being potentially poisonous. In the distance, Juliane heard the distinctive sound of a vulture, a sound she recognized from her days at Panguana. She knew one thing for certain: vultures usually flock to the dead bodies. Following the sound, she came across the remains of the broken plane. She was shocked to discover 3 fellow passengers still strapped to their seats. They had crashed headfirst into the ground, with their legs sticking up in the air, and were buried 3 feet deep into the ground. Among the 3 passengers, one was a woman. Despite knowing her mother was seated next to her, she had to check. Grabbing a branch, she cautiously nudged the body's feet over. She noticed painted toenails. Her mother never painted her nails, and she breathed a sigh of relief. The desperation of finding her mother was growing, but fate had something in store for Juliane. Amid the despair, she found a bag of sweets. This discovery became her sole sustenance, a tiny beacon of hope sustaining her in the days ahead. With incredible resilience, Juliane continued pressing forward, driven by the memory of her father's words. She knew that following the water downstream was her best chance of finding help or reuniting with the civilization. The days were sweltering with humidity, and the frequent rains did offer little relief, but when night fell, a new challenge emerged. The temperature used to drop drastically, and Juliane found herself cowering under bushes, shivering in her mini dress. The relentless attack of insects, particularly mosquitoes, tormented her. As if her suffering wasn't enough, her right arm was infested with maggots with flies buzzing around it. Juliane desperately tried to remove them, but her efforts were in vain. With each passing day, she feared she would lose her arm. The next day when she woke up, she attempted to check the time, but her watch had finally stopped working. From that point, she tried to count off the days, but found herself falling victim to confusion, a symptom of her traumatizing experience. After tirelessly traveling along the stream, a sound pierced the dense silence and reached her ears. A sound that breathed new life into her weary spirit. The dense canopy had muffled many sounds before, but this one broke through clearly. It was the distinctive call of a hoatzin, a bird that only nests near open stretches of water. Finally, after her long and grueling journey, Juliane was about to reach her planned destination. Believing that people must be settled near water, she followed the sound, picking up her pace. However, upon reaching the bank of the river, there were no signs of human civilization in sight, which broke her heart. She became even more depressed, as it had been a long time since she had heard the distant sound of planes, a glimmer of hope that had gradually faded with each passing day. She feared that the rescue operators had abandoned their search, or had rescued all the passengers except for her. Exhausted, she decided to spend the night on the riverbank and to continue her journey the next day. Upon waking in the morning, she noticed the densely overgrown riverbanks, presenting yet another challenge. The thick vegetation made it difficult for Juliane to continue her journey on land. To overcome this obstacle, she began to carefully wade through shallow water while keeping a vigilant eye out for stingrays, a hidden danger lurking beneath the surface. Recognizing that stingrays wouldn't venture into deep water, she decided to swim in the middle of the river. However, the Amazon waters held other threats, including piranhas and caimans, adding to the weight of her worries. After several days of her journey through the river, Juliane felt an excruciating pain in her upper back. When she reached to touch it, her hand came away streaked with blood. The relentless sun was scorching her while she floated down the river, causing severe second-degree burns. This physical agony amplified the overwhelming mental pressure on her mind. As the days wore on, Juliane began to experience hallucinations. Drifting along the river, she would see the roof of a house on the distant riverbank or imagine hearing the clucking of chickens. Hunger intensified her desperation, especially since her bag of sweets had been emptied. She even started to fantasize about lavish meals to eat. Each new morning brought with it a growing fear as the journey wore her down, both mentally and physically. The river that had once been her lifeline now seemed like an impossible obstacle. The 10th day of Juliane Koepcke's journey in the jungle marked a turning point in her story. As she continued her journey down the river, she encountered numerous logs that seemed to conspire against her. Climbing over them taxed her and the little energy she had left. Each log presented the risk of further injury or worse, a broken bone. After a grueling and exhausting day, she finally swam to shore, finding a gravel bank where she could rest for a few minutes. It was there, in her semi-conscious state, that she awoke to a startling sight, a boat in front of her. Struggling to trust her own eyes, Juliane tentatively approached the boat, half expecting it to vanish like a mirage. But as she came closer, the reality of its presence became undeniable. She began sprinting towards the boat and reached out to touch it for confirmation of its solidity. She broke down into tears of relief and gratitude, overwhelmed by the tangible hope the boat represented after days of seemingly endless despair. She knew help was around the corner. Juliane begins to look around and notices a small beaten path leading up the riverbank. She then follows the narrow trail up the riverbank, leading her to a small hut. In her exhausted state, what should have been a short trek took several hours. She hoped to find someone in the hut, but it was empty. Luckily, Juliane discovered a can of gasoline and, recalling her father's use of diesel to treat their dog's maggot-infested wounds, she poured it on her own infected arm to drive the parasites to the surface. One by one, she painstakingly removed 35 maggots from her arm. The exhausted teenager spent the remainder of the night in the hut, finally getting some much-needed sleep. On the morning of her 11th day in the jungle, as the rain began to fall, she wrapped herself in a tarp she had found in the hut, seeking shelter from it. In the afternoon, as the rain ceased, Juliane, feeling weary and unable to stand, chose to take another day of rest before continuing her journey. As dusk was approaching, she started to hear voices. Initially, she dismissed them as hallucinations. But the voices grew louder, more real. To her astonishment, 3 lumbermen emerged from the jungle. Their faces registered shock at the sight of a ragged, badly wounded teenage girl in the hut. At first, they feared her and believed she could be a water spirit they believed in called Yemenjabet. Fortunately for her, she could speak Spanish and informed them that she was a survivor of the Lanza crash and her name was Juliane. They tended to her wounds and provided her with much-needed nourishment, marking the beginning of her recovery. Hope had prevailed. The following morning, they gently placed her into the canoe and embarked on a 7-hour journey down the river to a lumber station, where they hoped to find assistance. At the lumber station, a local pilot stepped forward, offering to fly Juliane to a hospital. The short 15-minute flight felt like a lifeline as it carried her closer to safety. At the hospital, Juliane was finally reunited with her father, her family's first reunion since the plane crash. Juliane's reunion with her father was both a moment of relief and sorrow. From her hospital bed, Juliane provided crucial information to researchers, which aided them in locating the crash site and recovering more bodies. After 1 week, on the 12th of January, the rescue team was able to recover the remains of Juliane's mother, Maria Koepcke. It was then that Juliane received the heartbreaking news that her mother had also survived the initial fall, but succumbed to her injuries shortly thereafter. The trauma of her experience left a deep impact on Juliane. She battled nightmares for years and struggled with the grief of losing her mother and other passengers. Undeterred by the challenges she had faced, Juliane chose to follow in her parents' footsteps. She pursued her passion for biology, studying at the University of Kiel and graduating in 1980. Later, she earned a doctorate from Ludwig Maximilian University and returned to Peru, conducting research on bats for her thesis paper, a testament to her enduring love for the natural world. Although Juliane's journey had come to an end, it would always have a lasting impact on both her life and the world. Today, in her 60s, Juliane is a librarian at the Bavarian State Collection of Zoology in Germany. She frequently visits Panguana, the Peruvian research facility that her parents had founded, carrying on their legacy and her own passion for the natural world. The story of Lanza Flight 508 is a poignant reminder of the unpredictable nature of life and the incredible strength of the human spirit. It is considered one of the worst aviation accidents attributed to the lightning strike that occurred on December 24, 1971. The lightning strike ignited fuel vapors in one of the aircraft's fuel tanks, causing an explosion that led to the loss of the aircraft over the Amazon rainforest. In the silence that follows this tale, we honor the memory of the 91 souls lost on that fateful Christmas Eve, and we celebrate the resilience of one young woman who emerged from the depths of tragedy to tell her tale. This tragic event led to significant changes in aviation safety and the development of new standards for aircraft design, including improved lightning protection systems to prevent such accidents from occurring in the future. Thank you for joining in this incredible story of endurance, hope, and the unyielding power of survival. If you wish to watch more mystery and history-related content, consider subscribing to our channel History Mystery, as it helps us create high-quality videos. Until next time.